So, good afternoon, everyone. I have a great panel here today. My name's Anna Nichols. I'm Industry Director at Economist Intelligence Unit. And I have with me Ganesh Iyer from NEO, which is a high-performance EV maker. I have Angela, is it Angela?
Angela, yeah.
Hultberg from Kearney, which is a consulting company. I have Sylvain Philippi from Envision Racing, which is the most famous, obviously, for the Formula E competitions. I have Mike Smead from InMotion Ventures, which is a venture capital fund with investments in EVs. And finally, we have Dennis Nobilius, who is from Polestar, another EV maker. So you can see that after this great presentation from LEK on the consumer end of the EV market, we have a really good panel talking about the manufacturing end of that and what that looks like. So I wanted to start, Angela, by asking you, how important is the transition to electric vehicles in terms of reducing emissions, in terms of climate change?
Oh, it's absolutely crucial, isn't it? It's one of the biggest emitting sectors that we have globally. Not only from a CO2 perspective, we also have air pollution killing millions of people every year. A lot of that comes obviously from cars. Road transport is by far the biggest polluter in the transport sector. And a lot of these vehicles are where people are, right? That's where the cars are. Even if they do stand still most of the time, like we heard, when they drive around, they pollute the air for millions of people. And I can guarantee you all of us live in cities with toxic air pollution levels. Even if we don't think about it, people are actually dying. So it's absolutely crucial from both an environmental point of view, but also from a social point of view. We see a third of heart disease, asthma, lung cancer as a direct result of the air pollution too. So there's a big environmental component, but also a big social component.
Great. And so, Dennis, maybe, is it going fast enough? I mean, we saw some of the statistics there about how it sped up during the pandemic. Do you think it is now going fast enough that governments are putting enough effort into making this transition?
No, not by far. I mean, we need to accelerate that quite heavily. But it's not enough with electrification. So getting EV cars out there is one step, but you also need to charge them with green energy, and you need to change the entire supply chain and decarbonize. So it's by far not enough on the speed. And we have done a joint report here together with AT Kearney showing that we as an automotive industry is not performing up to standards, and we need to get that done quickly.
And so from your point of view, does this shift to electric vehicles have to go in tandem with the shift to renewable energy to make it make sense?
Yes, that is the ultimate goal, absolutely.
Right.
But it's not enough. You need to get the cars quickly out there, and you do not need to wait for the infrastructure. You need to get them out there and the infrastructure at the same time.
Yeah.
As much as it goes.
And in terms of that infrastructure, maybe, Mike, I can ask you about whether you think that investment into infrastructure is going fast enough, because so far a lot of the subsidies have been addressed at the consumer end to encourage adoption. Do you think there's now a need to shift that kind of focus of subsidies towards getting that charging infrastructure in place?
Yes, but I think from an investment angle, a lot of our investments have been focused more towards the consumer side, because there is as you heard in the previous session, there's a massive consumer pain point in the world of the world of charging vehicles, rather than focusing on the infrastructure side from our perspective as a fund.
Right. Okay. So you're still focused on that consumer end rather than on the charging end of the equation.
Absolutely. So it's about the end-to-end customer journey for us from the focus as far as Jaguar Land Rover is concerned. Although I must say, I was at an event a couple of weeks ago, and we had people from Chevron who were there talking about an event that they were at in Houston. And it's a massive focus, I know, for the energy companies to start to think about how is that infrastructure being put in. And I think what we're seeing from the US in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act, I think, is them starting to realize that it's going to really require, as you've described, a real end-to-end intervention, I think, is really what's required.
The trouble is you basically need all three things to be in place. You need renewable energy, you need the cars to be available, you also need that charging infrastructure. And it's a chicken and egg situation about which one of those goes first, really.
Yeah, completely, but you also need the customer pull
as
well. And for quite a long time, I think we've just, in the session before, this has been something that has accelerated very quickly and probably caught a lot of OEMs by surprise. Maybe not NIO in relating to China, but maybe certainly in Europe and particularly in the UK, it's been an almost vertical growth in that consumer demand, which pre-COVID just simply didn't exist.
Yeah. And talking of that, Ganesh, what's your perspective? Because you come from quite an interesting background in terms of you're head of the US part of NIO, but obviously you also have that Chinese backing in terms of your company. How do you see the contrast between the attitudes of those governments and the attitudes of the markets towards this shift?
See, if you step back and think about, right, this is a real problem. Forget about the nations, so China, India, America, etc. What is the number one reason that's impeding the broader adoption of EV today?
Yeah.
It's all around the concerns around the battery itself. Degradation of the battery, potential residual value going down if you beef up your battery or charge your battery as often time. So at NIO, when we started the company back in 2014, we took a step back and took a holistic view. How do we solve and provide an end-to-end power replenishment services? The whole idea was to drive more EV adoption to the consumers. So we came up with this chargeable, swappable, and upgradable end-to-end power replenishment services. Countries like United States and Europe, where there's relatively less population density, there are superchargers being installed in main highways. Countries like China, India, Indonesia, where population density is much, much larger, they don't have that luxury. How do we drive that adoption more? That's when this very unique, innovative model that only NIO came up with to date in the world, which is battery swapping. Think about it. In less than 4 minutes, before you finish your latte at a Starbucks, you get your battery fully replaced by a robot. So this whole notion of decarbonization, all that, it's a real thing. I think all the nations, in my perspective, needs to work together, regardless of the political barrier and agenda, and drive this problem together. So that's what we all should work towards. All the nations should work for.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to come to you, Sylvain, and talk about some of the technological improvements that you've seen, because obviously Formula E has been part of that journey, and you must have seen, at the front end how performance has changed. Can you talk us through where the main improvements have been?
Sure. Actually, it's linked to your first question as well. So the idea of Formula E is simply to do two things. First, use the media platform to show that electric cars are exciting and so on. 400 million people watched Formula E last year, and our goal is to grow that to 500, 600, 700, and the more people watch, the more impact we have. That's the marketing side. On the technology side, we have a very focused roadmap, which means when you look at the cars, they look the same, because we don't spend a single euro on bodywork or aerodynamics. We spend all our resource, energy, engineering on the powertrain and the battery. And long story short, we've been racing for 8 years. In 8 years, we've more than doubled the amount of energy in the battery, so we're able to do a race close to an hour on one charge. And the power has almost tripled, and we are now getting to a point where we have to try to slow down the cars because they're going too fast. And so it's an interesting kind of ramp over 8 years. But the main target is efficiency, and my colleagues from OEMs will understand that. A road car currently, best place, let's say 80 to 90% efficient. So for 100 units of energy you put in that car, whatever the energy, 80 to 90 will go to the wheel. Comparing to a very good IC engine will be 25, 30, but that's the hypothetical. In reality, the first half an hour of that car, the efficiency will be 5, if not that. So really, back to your earlier question, I actually don't completely agree. Electric cars powered by renewable energy is the holy grail. It's like we get there, zero emission, through the chain, no problem. But you take an electric car today, even if it's powered by the dirtiest grid, it's already better than buying a car. We have to realize that. So both things don't have to happen at the same time. As many electric cars as we can on the road, sure, and then decarbonize the grid as well, but they don't have to be together. If you compare the supply chain of energy from renewable energy to the grid to an electric car, that's easy to understand, and there's zero emission. You compare to extracting the fuel, refining it, putting it on a pipeline, putting it on a tanker, putting it on a truck, get to the fuel station, it's not even, it's a joke, like it's not even comparable. So efficiency is what it's all about. The Formula E cars, we are getting to 95 plus efficiency on these powertrains. Obviously very, very sophisticated technologies. So almost very, very, very few losses throughout the battery, inverter, motor, gearbox, differential to the wheel. And the idea is to trickle down these technologies. Some of them are high voltage. We're the first one to run cars at 800 volts. Our cars are now almost 1,000 volt architecture. That means you can charge a lot faster, you have few losses. And these technologies will trickle down through the OEMs, to the tier 1 suppliers, to road cars. And that means we can have affordable cars. We can have a car with a good range with only a 40 kilowatt hour battery, which in 5 years' time will be pretty inexpensive. And that's the idea. We use that efficiency to go fast, but you can use this exact technology to go not quite as fast, but go for a much longer range.
And how does that translate to consumers? Are the consumers who are really concerned about the power of EVs, and are you managing to get that technology into kind of mass market cars sufficiently to help?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in this industry for more than 12 years now, and believe me, 12 years ago, no one believed that you could either go fast or race or do any of these things. So there was a big mindset to change. We've pretty much done that, and Tesla and anyone who's developed fast cars these days we are 80-90% there, really. Now most people get that. Now that kind of part is almost done. Now the key part is the technology. Subsidies we talked about in Norway, all this is good, but ultimately, quite quickly in the next few years, most studies show that we'll get to a cost parity. And not that far further in the future, not to cost parity in terms of ownership, but simply purchase. Because let's not forget, the cost of making ICE cars is going up. To comply with all the regulations, you need more and more filters and electronics and so on. So one is going down, one is going up, and hopefully in the near future they'll cross.
Yeah. And Dennis, what's your perspective on this? I mean, what have you been focusing on in terms of technological improvements at Polestar?
Boosting volumes, exchanging ICE cars. That is our main target. But no, we are very much focused on design, and performance, and innovation, and bringing that to the end consumer. And I think already today, any electric car is a very strong competitive offer versus any ICE cars that you have there. And of course, there are different segments for different customers. But this is really what we're working with. The next level for us, that is to actually connect that electric vehicle to the rest of the ecosystem through vehicle to grid. Because then you can really shave off the peaks and you can make that as part of a society. So when that is standing still, it's also beneficial. So that is really something that we are looking into quite strongly.
And what's your feeling about the whole debate about the race for resources in terms of battery manufacturing, and particularly lithium, being environmentally damaging? How are you helping to counter that?
And I think that we, as the automotive or related to automotive companies, we have quite some bargaining power and buying power. So we need to be really clear regarding what are the demands, where are we allowed to mine, and how should that conditions be like, and then enforcing traceability. So we're using blockchain, for example, through a small startup called Circular, that we're then tracing a number of those materials. So I think we need to collaborate here and say, right, these are the demands, and this is what it looks like, and be willing to pay that price for ethically proper sourced material.
Mm-hmm. And so does that involve using ESG criteria? I mean, how do you actually make sure that you get the right suppliers?
Yeah, indeed. And that I think also we could actually collaborate around and say, these are good conditions. Okay, let's push that and let's secure that that is what we're now sourcing.
Right. Okay.
I'd agree with that if I can just build on your point. We're a fellow investor in Circular, so we understand what an amazing job that they do. And I think the idea of a battery passport, in particular in the EU, which is coming soon too, but in fact traceability throughout the supply chain of where our products and where our parts are coming from. But then you build onto that, and then you go into the circular economy. And again, another one of our investments was in a company called Ascend Elements, based in the US, which is recycling lithium batteries. And the black mass that is created is as equally as good as I suppose, virgin lithium, if you will. And we're seeing that as really, again, the future, to make sure that we have that circularity of the supply chain, so that we start the old reduce and recycle.
And I think that's a good example of where to compete and where to collaborate, right? So guys can compete on design and on performance and all of that, but not compete on sustainability because, no offense to anyone on stage, but you're all too small to change the world by yourself, right? But by joining forces within the automotive industry, that's how we start pushing, like Dennis mentioned, also supply chain upwards, because electrification and renewable energy will actually not be enough to keep below 1.5 for the automotive industry. We also need to reduce emissions upstream by roughly 80% by 2032, so there's not a lot of time. And if we're going to change the steel industry, the battery industry, aluminum, and cast iron, we need to join forces.
On the sustainability topic and the circular economy that my colleague Jaguar Land Rover mentioned, so a few things that we're doing within NEO to support this sustainability effort. One is we have a program called Blue Sky Lab, which is nothing but use the recycled material that's coming from the factory, be it seat belt, be it airbag, be it leather coming from the seats, etc. So we partner with a number of designers around the world to create recycle material and recycle, clothing, handbags, and all of that. Again, the strong support of the sustainability efforts we do it. In fact, I did bring one jacket to show you how cool this is, designed by Chalayan, one of the coolest designers from the UK. So it's amazing work that we're doing there.
And you mentioned battery swapping as one of your solutions to the problems about charging.
Yep.
I mean, how long are your batteries lasting, and what happens to them at the end of their life? What happens to the car that they're involved in?
So the main reason to the philosophy behind the battery swapping is to drive more purchasing power to the users who couldn't afford an electric car. Because if you look at what is the single most expensive component in any EV, it's the cost of the battery itself, right? So we started with this battery swapping technology. As a matter of fact, there's about 1,400 plus approved patents. Once the technology is proven at scale, that enabled us to rethink our business model, create a new business model called battery as a service. Again, the whole idea is to drive more purchasing power to the users. So what that essentially does is break the car into two separate financial transactions. You buy the car without the battery, and you pay a monthly subscription fee, roughly about $130, $140 depending on the battery pack. So thereby, you don't have any concerns about the battery, leave it to us, right? We have done, to date, we have done over 19 million successful battery swaps. All it takes is less than 4 minutes. As a matter of fact, I did myself 3 weeks ago in Shanghai. I was driving about 3 hours. You don't have to even get out of the car. Push a button, car does reverse park itself. Rest all done automatically by the robots. No human's invention. It just works like that. So again, that's driving the technological innovation to create new business model to drive more electrification on the road for the decarbonization initiative.
Right.
So that's one of our crown jewels.
Okay. And Dennis, do you have any views on that in terms of how
I mean, it's good. We need to test different methods. Whatever drives adoption of EVs, that's fine. We have chosen a different track. We see the battery, and we think that this worry about the battery is going away quite soon. So we think that the battery is more integrated into the body as an integral part in the race for range and less weight, and to make it like that. So that's the track that we are on. But we are happily supporting any kind of action that supports more EV adoption. So that's fine. Good to explore.
Okay. And Angela, you mentioned the question of collaboration earlier. I mean, definitely in the early stages of EV development, there was a problem with non-standardization of chargers, of batteries, all sorts of things. And how do car makers strike that balance between being able to collaborate and make sure that the charging infrastructure works for everyone, and also differentiating themselves and competing as car makers?
I think, well, I'm not a terribly patient person, I'll say that, so it's going too slow, for sure. I think what we need now is a lot of scale, because we do see very interesting collaborations, very unlikely collaborations between peers, between competitors, and also across different industries. It's not enough if automotive works with automotive. We need the energy sector, we need finance. It's going to take more. But I think what it is really addressing the hurdles, right? My favorite example is from heavy duty, right? So when Volvo, Traton, and Daimler joined forces to do a joint venture to build charging infrastructure for heavy-duty vehicles across Europe, that says something. These are not companies that work together. And me and Dennis, who are both Swedish, can say that Volvo and Scania in a joint venture. What? But it's what's needed, right? The infrastructure was their #1 hurdle. And so they decided, let's not compete on this. It's too expensive. It's not efficient. Let's join forces, have it done. And then again, we can compete on performance, design, services, functionality. but let's not compete on this. It's just not useful for anyone because we need scale. And the only way to get scale is through adoption. But I think there's loads of examples in the industry of collaboration that I'm quite excited about to see. And also between the startup community, like Dennis is building a whole ecosystem to help build a net zero car with like everyone who has anything to contribute with. And I think that's quite exciting. And it will benefit the totality of the industry.
I agree. It's a complete ecosystem play.
Yes.
Because no one OEM can win it. Because again, the main reason for that lower adoption of EV is the infrastructure concerns about it. That's why, if you look at in the United States, with the Inflation Reduction Act that was put in, so proprietary OEMs, they cannot, they've been, for example, Tesla, if you look at it, it was enabled only for Tesla vehicles. Guess what? Now Tesla has to open it up.
Yeah.
ChargePoint have to open it up. Electrify America has to open it up in order to get piece of that infrastructure bill that government is. The whole idea is to drive more EV adoption. So the entire ecosystem have to come together to solve this problem. I think no one OEM can do it all.
And it's also more consumer friendly because in the beginning, and I was working with it quite early on, and when we had the phone charging situation all over again with like different chargers for it was a nightmare.
Yep.
But at least we learned something from digitalization and all of that. So like maybe we should just have a standard and run with that. So there are lessons to be learned from others. But at the end of the day, it needs to be convenient for the consumer or it's never going to work out.
Yeah. And Sylvain, as far as you're concerned, in terms of the actual formulation of the batteries, are we at the end state? Or I mean, there are some people that would argue that actually hydrogen fuel cells are the end state and that we're kind of getting towards that. What's your feeling about that?
Good question. So my parent company, Envision, bought ASC, the old Nissan battery business, a few years ago, and it's now done a 10x in size in the last 3 years. There's a huge demand, as we know, in batteries. Manufacturers do very long-term commitments to buy batteries, but also the technology is evolving rapidly, but importantly, predictability as well. We're getting there. So is it the end game? No, not at all. We've seen on average, I don't know if you see that, 7-8% on average improvement on energy density over the last 15 years, mean average. And there's some breakthrough coming, but I think you have to make sure that the expectations are realistic, and with the current technology, you can do a good job. For me, at the end of the day, science wins, right? So hydrogen has a fantastic applications in some industries. I don't believe it 1 second for transportation. Back to my efficiency point. There's no other technology out there that gets anywhere near the efficiency of a battery electric car. So it doesn't matter if you like batteries or not, that's just the way it's gonna go. Because at the end of the day, it's money, it's cost, and it's the quickest way to get to net zero. So we'll see, but the future is exciting when we can get to a step change in energy density, not even 100%, but 20, 30%. That will be absolutely the end of ICE cars, because then the cost actually will be significantly cheaper, and then over 10 years it will not even compare. So that's the exciting part.
Yeah. And I agree with that, because also whatever green hydrogen we can muster, we will need for
Correct.
other industry. Why would we spend it on cars when cars can do perfectly well with batteries? And probably once we reach 600 kilometers, probably going to flatten out. Like range anxiety is real, but it is very much anxiety. Like how far do you actually need to do you buy a car for that one trip to, you road trip in the summer to go to France or like to go skiing? You don't buy a house because, the size of what you need when your family come visit at Christmas. And you shouldn't buy a car thinking you need 1,000 kilometers.
And it's market by market, as you know, right? I've been driving an EV for more than 8 years in the UK, and the UK is a pretty small country. I went to Glasgow to COP last year from London, charging twice on the way. It was pretty easy, and as far as you can go. So US is a bit different. You have some long distances, but you still get there, right? So
I've been on EV for 13 years, my entire family. So I don't even know what internal combustion engine car looks like, to be honest.
Exactly.
But you're right. I think we should we as OEMs then should not go for the 150, 160 kilowatt hours batteries and trying to go crazy on that. We should be more focused on the fast charging and being able to do that, because if you can minimize time at the charging station, that is of value. And then you can still run with a 70, 80 kilowatt hour battery, something like that.
And what's debatable and interesting is from my experience, the 20-minute fast charge we talked about in the previous session, it's actually perfectly good enough for most people. Like with my car, last few years, I actually have to run to go to the loo and get a coffee and come back. The car is always ready before me. That's at 150 kilowatt charging, right? So 300 kilowatt is coming now, pretty much. It's today's technology, nothing really fancy. And that I can guarantee you will make that the cars are charging quicker than the run to the services and back. So I think we're pretty much getting there.
That's where the battery swapping, in my opinion, has an advantage, because you can always load balance the battery. No one battery is getting beaten up, right? Because using the BMS system, you can remotely diagnose the battery before it comes for rotation. What is the health of that battery? So you can load balance your battery packs. If you have a battery swapping type technology that's proven, that is scalable, and that's working efficiently. Yeah. We have seen that every single day. In fact, the last month's data I was looking at, about 75% of the total energy from the NEO power was consumed by non-NEO products, i.e. BYD, Teslas, and others. So we have opened up our supercharging infrastructure for others, in China especially. So battery swapping has its own advantage, in my opinion, because significantly it can load balance the battery packs across your fleet.
Mike, coming to you. Obviously, this shift to electric vehicles involves a massive shift in the automotive industry as a whole, and as has been pointed out, there will be winners and losers from that. Do you think, from your point of view, that sometimes distorts the way that investment is going in, or are people really focused on the end goal, which is the climate change effect of this?
I'm just trying to think how to answer that. I think that there's two things kind of going on. I mean, I think in terms of the climate case, I think if we go back a number of years ago, there was some form of debate. There was some form of discussion. There is no debate. We've all seen the numbers, and we know that if we're going to be good ancestors to people, then we'd like to leave a planet for people to inherit. That's the point. And without big industry, that's going to be impossible to have. What I would say, and what's been amazing, is you've got two things colliding here, which is the traditional OEM from an automotive perspective, which hasn't really changed for almost 100 years, if you will, for the combustion engine, and a plethora of really startup companies starting with that white sheet of paper that we heard about. And it's a hell of a lot easier to do that when you haven't got legacy. When you haven't got, as I heard a lady previously talking about Dior, and she was talking about the idea of you've got this legacy customer base, so you're trying not to frustrate or annoy. At the same time, you're trying to attract this entire new audience who've been really excited about what the vehicles can offer. But that has also come at the same time as you've described about the technology that's available in a vehicle, because historically, in a car, as you were driving along, you had a fuel gauge, you had a temperature sensor if you were lucky, and maybe a few other things. But from a service perspective or an OEM perspective, the only time you knew how that car really was in its annual service or biannual service. Now, the ways that cars are connected with the technology, there are thousands of data points coming back into the center of all of these big data centers on a daily, a minute by minute basis, to really see how that is completely changing. And I think that's the exciting thing. Whether it's loading or predictive maintenance or all of those things, just means that the ability for the OEM to interact with the customer is massively different to where it was before. So as they become more demanding, the OEMs become more sophisticated, I think this thing's coming together in an amazing way.
Great. I have loads more questions, but I'm sure the audience does too. So has anybody got anything that they would like to ask our panel?
Hi, thanks very much. What are the issues around the components of batteries, particularly the metals and things that are used in that, and what innovations are coming in place that are going to take away some of the heavy metals or the negative metal things and coming up with new solutions for battery technology, and how's that going to revolutionize how vehicles are built?
Ganesh.
Great, yeah. It's a great question. It's like solving one problem creates another problem, right? So these batteries have limited shelf life. And, I can speak on what's happening in the United States market. Number of battery recycling companies and the innovations have emerged out of this. For example, the ex-CTO of Tesla Motors, so he started a new company called Redwood Materials, which Ford has invested a tremendous amount of money. Again, how do we recycle the precious material that is lithium and other materials inside it? So innovation it's early, infancy stage, if you ask me honestly, but there are a lot of emphasis, and then funding goes in that direction to actually even how do we safely, securely recycle this precious materials out of these batteries that are dying or have died.
Yeah, perfect. And there's another business model we should not forget. Is that first, in every car on the road, you'll have 5,000 to 10,000 euros worth of batteries, even in 10, 15 years' time. So that for sure is not going to go to waste. There's too much money there. Someone is going to want to do something about it. But you can either recycle, as said, but there's a huge market emerging, which is you actually take these modules, cells module level, you don't do a single thing to them, you just stack them in series, and they become energy storage for factories, warehouses, and in the future, really grid energy storage. Because a battery that has done 10 years in a car, that is at 80% state of health, roughly, has had a really tough life, because in a car, you want really high power, really high regen. You take that cell, that exact same cell, you put it on a static application, the demands are very, very low. You're looking up minus 10 kilowatts. That same battery, that same cell, can last another 20 years in static. So there's these two ways, and either you recycle to make a new one, or you keep that cell and it goes into a warehouse somewhere. You get probably at least 30 years of life of these materials and this battery. So again, you compare that to the fuel you put in your car once and it burns and you'll never see it again. It's not even comparison, so that's the way it's going to go.
Any more questions in the room? Oh, sorry. Yes, there are some online. Thank you. I can't actually read them very well. Could you? Oh, okay. Maybe I can read this one. What message does it send the EV market when the largest automotive market, Germany, effectively is continuing supporting ICE engines after 2035? This is referring to the recent decision on e-fuels. So, Dennis, maybe you can answer that one.
Sure, I'll be happy to. No, I mean, I understand why they're searching for these technology-neutral implications. I think, of course, normally that would make sense. Personally, I think this is a distraction, and I think that this risk putting funding away from pure electrification and putting that into some kind of debate, going, okay, how do we treat this now? So personally, I think that this could be a distraction, and it creates a lot of debates. I mean, we are talking about it now instead of talking about electrification and going all in. So that would be my view.
I think overall, like spending R&D money on an internal combustion engine today feels an awful lot like spending it on an electric typewriter 10 years ago. Like you can have the best electric typewriter on the market, but if the computer's already there, like why would you? Why would anyone spend innovation money on a technology that is clearly not the future?
Although end to end, I thought that actually the figures for e-fuels made with renewable energy were not that bad.
Terrible, less than
Still
half.
terrible?
Yeah, pretty terrible. Yeah, you can still make it cleanly, but the engine itself is still very inefficient. So it makes sense for niche applications, for aviation, sports cars, in some places, yeah, fine. But volume, I'm actually, ask us again in 10 years. I think the consumers will vote the EV direction. Okay. Because I think for cost, even just simply for cost, back to the efficiency, it will be cheaper.
Okay, thank you. So society receives the benefit of EV adoption, but individuals bear the cost. How can we even this out? Subsidies seems to be the main question.
I think we have to also differentiate what is a cost and what is an investment. Yes, the upfront investment of an EV is higher. Total cost of ownership with lower fuel cost, lower maintenance cost, is it really higher? I think cost parity will, like you predict, happen really, really soon. But I think we need to look at more than just the moment of purchase if we are to compare apples to apples. That said, it's not available for all. It should be. We need mass adoption quickly. We need them to filter down to the second-hand market. All of that. They need to be cheaper. But is the total cost that much higher? I don't know.
And also usable when standing still.
That's why you should buy the car under the business, the battery as a service model, because for the consumer, upfront cost is reduced by roughly $10,500.
Be very fond of that model.
What does all of this mean for developing countries? I mean, a country like India, where they've basically only just starting to buy cars in mass numbers. Should they be shifting to EVs? Can they afford to do that shift now?
I think we have to also realize that mobility does not look the same across the world. So today here we focus a lot on electrification, on new car sales. That is not what mobility is in large parts of the world. When we talk in Northern Europe about shared mobility, like that would be Uber, when the entire infrastructure for mobility in the continent of Africa is shared mobility. It's people making a living of this. I think we have to be a bit humble that transport mobility does not equal new car sales. I think we also need to be cautious that we're not creating any kind of ice dumping, that as Europe and North America shifts to electric vehicles, we simply ship off all the internal combustion engine to South America and to Africa. So there is a just transition component to this that we need to be very cautious about, so we don't, like you say, fix one problem to create another problem. Climate change is global, so it doesn't much matter if we fix UK. The emissions are still there from somewhere else unless we do it in the right way.
I think for the developing countries, since you mentioned India, so the government alone cannot solve this problem. So to me, I think the private sectors also should share equal partnership, if you will. So private sectors have to step in to drive this EV adoption in developing countries especially. Government alone cannot do it, in my opinion. It should be a partnership model.
Right.
Yeah. We had a race in Hyderabad a few weeks ago, and the local region minister was there and very proud to have a mobility show, and all the new vehicles unveiled were electric. Two-wheelers, three-wheelers, lightweight vehicles, all electric, and they were saying that the roadmap for them is use solar a lot to power this, and they believe they will get to cheaper cost per mile traveled than with the cost of oil petrol, which keeps on going up.
Yeah.
So there's a roadmap. It might be a bit different, but
Yeah. So again, we're coming back to that issue about renewable energy having to go in
Yep.
in step with electrification. Probably just time for one more. What are the bottlenecks to producing more EVs? Why are waiting lists so long? Perhaps, Dennis, you could answer that one. I don't know.
Last year, semiconductors. That's the easy response to that. This year, it shouldn't be semiconductors anymore. So now it's more customer demand and getting that pull really through the entire chain.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much to my panel for that
thank you.
discussion.
Thank
Thank you.